So, the aspect of quality assurance, and there are two, as we discussed previously, various drivers of quality assurance related to the marketization, privatization, globalization, diversification of provisions, expanding system amongst the few. The assurance of quality has two aspects. One is the external quality assurance aspect, where an external assessor or accreditor comes and assesses the institution, and the other is the internal aspect. Now, the external quality assurance mechanism is through the provision of the institutional assessment and accreditation, as I said earlier. This involves an external agency. Now, this agency may be autonomous, or it may be associated at the federal government or the central government level. For example, in India, we have the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, or it may be an independent accreditation agency. The other important aspect of this external quality assurance is that there is a peer team or a team of faculty members who come to review the institution. So, there is a peer review, which is an important aspect of external quality assurance, and then public disclosure of institutional data. So, here there is nothing confidential or something which can remain hidden. There are indicators which are set by the external quality assurance agencies, and based on indicators, whatever claim some higher education institution makes has to be provided in the public disclosure to the public. The purposes are varying. These could be for the regulation of the higher education sector, either by the government or by the markets. So, we may say that in largely, the sector which has been largely controlled by the government is the main regulator. The government wants to understand what is the quality of institutions, where to put the money. Which institutions need more support, which are institutions need to be supported to develop the capacity, which are the institutions who have the capacity and needs to be funded accordingly. Similarly, the markets also make these kinds of decisions and they are therefore important drivers in regulating the sector. The other aspect is, and which is related to the regulation aspect again, is ensuring public accountability. That if so much money, even if the institutions are privately funded, the students are paying to study in those institutions, whether the quality of education that they receive is good enough for them to achieve the goals in their life, whatever they had decided when they entered the higher education system. For that purpose, and whether that education is, again, that is another component of the assessment, that whether it is helping the countries achieve their goals. Also, accountability towards funders. We find that there are various examples of the countries which are small countries, which are emerging economies, where the government may not have enough fund, and various funders, various agencies come together to fund the higher education system there. Again, accountability towards those funding agencies become important, that whether the institutions have been able to achieve what the funding agencies wanted them to achieve, and therefore if the quality has also an assessment whether the quality has improved or not. When we come to the issue of the internal quality assurance is something which has been inherent or should be inherent in any higher education institution, irrespective of whether an external assessor or accreditor wants an institution to have an internal quality assurance system or mechanism or not. So, internal quality assurance is carried out by the institutions themselves through various institutional structures of governance and management. We have, for example, the Board of Studies, various doctoral research committees. These are some examples of the institutional structures which ensure the quality of the curriculum at various stages. Then the special units such as internal quality assurance cells, which are constituted for the purpose, and they may be inherent already in the higher education institutions, or they may be as part of the requirement of the external accreditor or assessor. For example, the National Assessment and Accreditation Council expects the higher education institutions which are going for the second or subsequent cycle of accreditation to establish internal quality assurance cells. So, the purpose for this internal quality assurance mechanism or the system is for the internal governance and management of quality, and for the compliance to regulatory body or external quality assurance agency. Now, this is, as a teacher in higher education institutions, very important for us to understand. What is happening at the institutional level is that wherever in whichever institution we are working as teachers, we are involved in the various processes and mechanisms through our practices, the outcome of which relate to the quality of an institution. This is one aspect. The second is that any institution which has been higher education institution which has been established cannot achieve its quality purpose without the collaboration and interaction of its participants and stakeholders, which is the students, the teachers, and the key institutional leaders. And therefore, to have these internal quality assurance mechanisms, the involvement of these the stakeholders is very important for the internal governance and management of quality at the institutional level. What is happening is this purpose remains sidelined in most of the higher education institutions, and we will come to that some of the examples from derived from research in Indian higher education system. And mostly what is happening is that compliance to the regulatory body or external quality assurance agency becomes an important driver. So, for the institutions, for the teachers, it is very important to understand that the quality assurance mechanisms, the data that are collected at the institutional level are used for the purpose of internal governance and management of quality besides compliance to the regulatory body. Now, coming to the level of organization of quality assurance, the quality assurance systems could be organized or are organized globally at the three levels. At the federal level, where the government or the central body, central government is the regulator or assesses the higher education institutions. At the state and provincial or the provincial level, at the supranational level, where the quality assurance from various countries and regions, they come together and they form a quality assurance network. At the federal level, if we see the case of India, till now the National Assessment and Accreditation Council had been the main assessor of quality accreditation of the higher education institutions for the multidisciplinary universities. And we know that the All India Council for Technical Education, AICTE, has been also looking at the quality of higher education institutions in the technical, working in the technical sector. So, the difference between however two has been that although DAC has been looking at the multidisciplinary universities and colleges, but the focus has been on the institutional assessment, whereas the AICTE has always looked at the level of the programs. The state provincial level of quality assurance, it may or may not exist in your state where you are working. So, you just write to us, let us know whether there is any state or provincial level of quality assurance in the state where you are working. Supranational quality assurance agencies, there is European network of quality assurance agencies. The emergence of European higher education area is one such examples where the quality assurance agencies, they came together, and based on the certain indicators, the quality of higher education system in the European region became an important aspect. The quality assurance became an important aspect for the institutions and the quality assurance agencies involved. So when the quality assurance agencies come together, they also serve as trendsetters, or they set the benchmarks for quality for higher education institutions, that who will get involved, how their reputation will be assessed in the marketplace. This is one slide which depicts the phases in quality assurance systems. Various countries since 80s, as we discussed, when the quality assurance systems start developing, there were many reasons, and the problems, there were problems which were identified with the higher education system and which led to these drivers. So besides the expansion, marketization, and the public accountability aspect, there were serious doubts about the educational standards of the higher education, and we said earlier also that there were concerns that the higher education graduates are not employable. Now this aspect is also debatable, whether the economy of a country has enough resources to provide employment, but in the context of globalization, it is also considered that the employment can be available everywhere. So it's not important that even in one country, if you study in higher education institution of a state, then you get employment in the same state. You may move to some other state or to another country for employment. So serious doubts about higher educational standards. So what happened, that the role of quality assurance in these kinds of systems where there are doubts about standards becomes to identify which are the substandard educational programs first of all, and to weed them out. And what kind of information base is used? There are descriptive reports, performance indicators, and here the accreditation, checking on standards, reporting to the state becomes an important aspect. So closing down of programs which are not good quality, or encouraging programs which are quality programs, could be one of the outcomes in this kind of thing. Then another phase which the quality assurance systems have seen is this doubt about the efficiency of the higher education system and institutions. And therefore, as we discussed earlier also, it's an issue of public accountability, and also making the institutions aware about the purpose of having quality institution, or creating quality awareness amongst the institutions. And therefore, what is happening is that the information base which is used for these in such kind of quality assurance system is that their descriptive strategic reports are used, which are mostly one can say self-advertising, self-selling kind of reports, which cover the performances and procedures, what we have done, what we have achieved at the institutional level, and how much we have achieved. And the nature of external review, and in terms of outcome, how it is depicted is in terms of ranking of the institutions, one report to the state and institutions, and identifying good practices. We can see that NAAC, when it does the institutional assessment, also has this component of good practices. The third is the phase is when there is doubt about innovative capacity. Okay, the institutions are good enough, the graduates are gaining employment, that is fine, but what is the innovative capacity of these institutions, and quality assurance capacity of the institutions, how well the institutions are able to assure the quality of the processes, of the practices. And here the role of the quality assurance then is not to ensure the accountability, but rather to stimulate self-regulation capacity of the institutions besides the public accountability. So the institutions have to evaluate themselves. It is not about self-selling, it is about self-evaluation. It is more a kind of reflexive exercise where the institutions think and they assess, evaluate their own systems, their own procedures, their own performance, and therefore which results in audit report to the institution or the state in showing how the institutions have performed, whether they have innovation capacity or not. And the fourth phase in the quality assurance systems is need to stimulate the sustainable quality culture in institutions. Any initiative which is a quality initiative, any mechanism, any practice which is a quality practice or mechanism, if it is not sustainable, if it is not an ongoing thing, will not be able to accrue benefits for the higher education system and its participants, that is the students and the teachers and other beneficiaries such as the larger society and the industry. So, what is the role of quality assurance in this kind of scenario? There is a split between self-improvement based on self-regulation and public accountability. So, that sustainable quality culture, enabling that, stimulating that sustainable quality culture is very important. And what we see, the research shows, and here are some of the references that you can see, that there is a split between self-evaluative reports about processes, strategies based on, we do this, the higher education institutions and at the level of the departments also tend to do this analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and challenges, and also benchmarking, and then self-reporting about the performance indicators. So, this split is also between the audit reports to the institutions and verifying data to be incorporated in the public databases. But what is happening here is, then again I would say that the focus remains on the compliance, and therefore this need to stimulate this sustainable quality culture where the institutional participants, students, teachers, key institutional leaders and the larger society is concerned about the quality of the institution of the teaching, learning in higher education institutions is an important component.